Lisey went to the mirror and scrutinized her reflection. Delicate natural makeup emphasized the freshness and youthfulness of her skin. Her dark shiny hair was pulled back into a low bun. A couple of strands framed her face in soft waves. A snow-white dress with a lace top sat very nicely on her slender, trim figure. It was not for nothing that she had been going out for a morning jog every day for many years and going to the gym 3 times a week. Even today, the day of the wedding, she got up at 6 o'clock so as not to miss the workout. The bride was already ready to go, even though the car would not arrive for her until about 40 minutes later. This habit, to get ready in advance, remained from the children's home, where discipline and punctuality were considered even more important than studying. Lisey remembered well those gray, joyless years. The teachers were friendly, and the other children did not hurt her, but still coldness and formalism seeped from everywhere. Perhaps if she had been there since birth and had not known the joy of life in a family before, she would not have suspected the existence of such a clear contrast and would have considered the state institution a home. But it so happened that she remembered her parents well. At the thought of her mom, a prickly lump came to her throat. Though Lisey had been only 10 years old when she was gone, she remembered her beautiful kind eyes and gentle hands well, and her melodious velvety voice. In the house almost constantly spread, then modern life-affirming songs, then long, sad romances. Mom was always humming something. When she was cooking dinner in the kitchen, cleaning, sewing. Between the parents reigned a special tender relationship. The girl never heard that they quarreled, only in the evenings argued about what movie to watch on TV. Dad jokingly called his wife people's artist, and she laughed merrily in response. Little Liza then seemed that the whole world is as calm, measured, filled with warmth and music as their home. One day, parents with happy faces announced to the girl that she would soon have a brother or sister. Lisey languished in joyful anticipation, gently touched her mother's slightly rounded tummy, and imagined how much fun it would be for the 4 of them to live together. Trouble crept up unnoticed and covered her head at once. That day, returning from school in an unusually quiet, deserted apartment, Lisey somehow sixth sense realized something happened. Her neighbor came to see how she was doing. From her, the girl learned that in the afternoon her mother was taken to the hospital by ambulance. The unknown was frightening and disturbing, and time stretched unusually slow. Late in the evening came silent and pale as death, her father with a bottle of alcohol in his hands. Frightened, Lisey stood in the kitchen doorway and watched as he filled a cut glass with the foul-smelling liquid and drank it in one gulp, without even a snack. When he finally noticed his daughter, he woke up, rubbed his face with his palms, and took a deep breath. The little girl's heart was pounding frantically. She had never seen her daddy like that. "Lisey, our mom is gone," he said in a strained voice. His voice was unpleasantly creaky, and his face was purple under the influence of alcohol. "What do you mean, gone?" She couldn't quite grasp the information, but her voice trembled in anticipation of something terrible. The man leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes tiredly. "Mommy died with your brother," he said upward, inhaled noisily, and suddenly an awful, sorrowful sound came out of his mouth, like a moan or a howl. A chill ran down Lisey's spine. Poor girl did not know what struck her more at that moment, the news of her mother's death or such a terrible animal reaction of her father. Life split into 2 halves, before and after. The one before, happy and carefree, now seemed fairy tale and distant. The one that came after dispersed into a fog-bright childhood and plunged the girl into a terrible dusky reality. At the funeral gathered all the neighbors and acquaintances. People loved in life kind, sociable singer, who always sympathetically listened to old ladies on the bench at the entrance, helped neighbors with money before payday, despite her own modest family budget. All night the night before, she cried at her mother's coffin. Only in the morning a neighbor literally made the unfortunate girl lie down, at least for a couple of hours to sleep. In the morning, the first thought that came into her head was what a terrible bad dream she had, but immediately her consciousness brought her back to the cruel reality. That frosty, overcast December day was etched in her memory for the rest of her life. I was struck by the silence with which people came in sad succession to the young woman to say goodbye. It seemed that the whole world froze in reverence before the pure soul who had gone. Only the quiet rustle of the funeral procession's footsteps and a rare, almost indistinguishable whisper broke through the ringing silence. Tears were streaming down Lisey's cheeks. She couldn't even understand where they came from. She seemed to have cried them all at night and dried up her soul to the very bottom. Suddenly, but also silently, it began to snow, which almost instantly began to pile up in huge fluffy flakes. The cemetery workers hurried the attendants, covered the coffin with a lid and started hammering. The sound of each nail hammered into the heart of the unfortunate girl was a sharp pain. The father, who until then had been staring at one point and silent, suddenly uttered another groan, which was echoed by several women. A squall of grief swept through the crowd. An unknown hand clutched Lisey's throat tightly, her eyes darkened, and she nearly passed out, gasping for air. The gravediggers with their usual movements quickly did their job and covered the clay mound with a whole bunch of fresh and artificial flowers. Father approached with an unsteady gait and collapsed on his knees, right on the chilly ground near the grave. Nature, as if trying to smooth out all the irregularities and roughness, covered everything around with soft snow-white clumps, painting a perfect picture of serenity. The fragile girl approached her father, helped him to his feet with a firm hand, and led him away from the place where their beloved mother and wife had forever found their peace. Trying to drown his sorrow, my father now every day poured into himself new and new doses of alcohol, which only for a short time dulled the heartache. After work, he came already drunk and continued to jingle glass containers in the kitchen until late in the evening, bringing himself to an ugly state. When the flushed, groggy man began to shout loud songs mixed with sobs, losing his balance and breaking fragile objects that happened to be at hand, Lisey dragged him into the bedroom and put him on the bed. In the morning he looked guiltily into the stern but kind eyes of his daughter, who had grown up early, and swore that it was the last time. In the evening everything was repeated again. At school, the former excellent teacher pitied teachers, trying to pull on more or less good grades, but the girl did not care too much. Domestic worries completely fell on her shoulders. But the most disturbing was her father, who was sinking lower and lower. Lisey felt sorry for the man who was unable to control his own emotions. With pain in her heart she watched his struggle with himself, but she could not help. Only the appearance of social workers in their apartment really shook the man up. The prospect of losing his daughter made him give up his addiction. For almost 3 weeks the man walked around clean-shaven and unusually quiet. And then suddenly he came home drunk with an open bottle of vodka, went straight to his room and then fell silent. The girl held a grudge against her father and did not even go to him. After all, he promised that now everything will be different, and here again. Maybe he just does not need her. He didn't wake up this morning. The ambulance came and pronounced him dead of acute alcohol poisoning. It was a real tragedy. The long-suffering girl cursed herself and blamed herself for pouting her lips while her father was dying behind the wall. If it hadn't been for stupid ego, he might have been saved in time. The thought burned her from the inside out, leaving ugly raw scars, constantly reminding her of the immense guilt she'd attributed to herself. Orphaned at 12 and left in an orphanage, Lisey often wondered why fate had been so cruel to her. Why does she lavish others with gifts, and from her only mercilessly takes away? There were no answers. Lisey shook her head, pushing away the unhappy memories. Today would be different. Her dream would finally come true, something she had been working so long and hard towards for the past few years. Now she wouldn't have to go to the hated boring office and sit at the computer for hours pretending to be active. Ron, of course, is a pity, constantly having to deceive him. He really is madly in love. Does she have the right to do this to him? A year ago, when they supposedly met by chance at the gym, Lisey would not have thought of such a thing. He was just a means to an end. By then, she knew everything about Ron and more. 26 years old. His parents owned 2 businesses, a small gas station chain, and a dozen other smaller businesses. The family is run by a rigid and suspicious mother. The soft-bodied son is kept in a firmer grip. Despite the huge income, controls his spending, and all the girls look under a microscope, bringing them to a white heat and mercilessly destroying just-born relationships. Ron lacked her ironclad entrepreneurial acumen, although he graduated from law school and headed one of the firms, but the dull, monotonous work did not please him. The soul stretched to something beautiful, creative. He has repeatedly tried to break out of the sweet family web and go on an independent voyage through life. Once he even bought a good camera and became seriously interested in photography. He discovered in himself the ability to see in everyday familiar things a special beauty, to be able to properly capture it and show it to others, a real art. But his mother immediately suppressed these creative endeavors and sent her son to the bench, cherishing the hope of someday involving him in a serious family business. Lisey set herself a difficult task, to win the heart of the heir to a huge wealth. True had to get a job in some faceless office, so as not to arouse suspicion of Pam. After all, to probe her son's fiancé will be sure. Well, if she doesn't dig up what the girl had been doing for the last few years right after the orphanage. There were no difficulties with Ron. The guy immediately fell in love with a smiling, pretty girl with an easy character and a wonderful figure. And Lisey also tightened her knowledge of photography in advance. The common passion was decisive. Ron was finally convinced that this amazing girl was a gift from above. However, his mother had to go through all the circles of hell. She made checks, threatened, and tried to bribe him. The girl did not give up and bent her line. Loves Ron and all here. The guy also did not fail. Unexpectedly showed a firmness of character and insisted on his decision to tie his fate with his beloved by the bonds of marriage. Ron turned out to be a great guy. He prepared grand romantic surprises for Lisey. One day they would go to see the sea. The next, they would fly high into the blue sky in a hot air balloon. Next to this naive, kind guy, the girl felt calm and protected. But to fall in love was not part of her plans, and she ruthlessly stifled the budding sympathy in herself, and all this for one thing only. Just a little bit left and the goal is achieved. In her eyes flashed a devilish, triumphant light, but she immediately suppressed it in herself. No, she's not a monster. She just wants to restore justice. It was not for nothing that she had suffered for so many days. The phone rang and the receiver rang dryly. "The car is in the driveway, come out." Lisey put the phone in her tiny purse and went downstairs. When she saw what her future mother-in-law had sent for her as a means of transportation, she was stunned at first, not believing her eyes. And then she laughed out loud. How this woman does not like the future daughter-in-law. Wreckage of domestic production with an open door proudly awaited the bride. Both front fenders long ago got rid of the native paint and almost rotted. Corrosion had not spared the rest of the car. It was all rippling with rusty spots. Cheap capes covered the old cracked seats of the smoky interior. Pam was clearly provoking the girl. Well, no. Lisey would not be so easily thwarted. The bride nonchalantly picked up the snow-white hem and got into the car. The central wedding palace was buzzing like a beehive. Ron and Lisey's guests had already gathered in one of the reception halls. On the girl's side were only two friends, whom she asked to keep quiet. The groom rushed towards her and gently took her hand. His eyes shone with happiness. "How beautiful you are, honey." He couldn't help but admire her. Pam wondered loudly and snidely how she'd gotten there. Lisey didn't even raise an eyebrow. She smiled sweetly in return. "Great. Thank you for your concern." The future mother-in-law grinned haughtily and took the microphone in her hands. "Well, here's our homeless woman finally showed up. Frog in a box has arrived." She laughed. Someone from the invitees echoed her loud laughter. The son looked reproachfully at his mother and tried to pull her back, but she still had not given up hope to make the bride mad and upset the wedding. Every word from her lips was literally soaked with venom. "Dear guests, I'd like to introduce our future daughter-in-law. Please understand our son's choice. His bride was brought up in an orphanage and has not a penny behind her soul. Despite this, we are ready to honor her and accept her into our wonderful family, which has always been famous for its democracy." Lisey listened to her rant with a stone face. These murderous speeches for a delicate mental organization, said in a patronizing tone, did not bother her anymore. It was not easy to break through the armor hardened by a hard life. A message arrived on her phone. She cast a glimpse at the screen and smiled contentedly. Well, it's time. It's finally possible. She approached the woman satisfied with her tirade and took the second microphone from the counter. "And now it's my turn. I would like to thank you for the invitation to join the family, but it is not compatible with my honor." She looked into the eyes of the puzzled woman and, minting each word, finished the phrase, "The honor of a police officer." The smile instantly slipped from the face of the potential mother-in-law, and the bride continued, "I refuse to link my fate with people who multiply their fortune through blackmail, raiding, and contract killings." With each of her words, the woman's face stretched with surprise and fear flashed in her eyes. The guests looked at each other in bewilderment. The bride continued her shocking speech. "A few years ago, I already had a fiancé. We loved each other very much and had already set a wedding date." Lisey's voice trembled and tears appeared in her eyes, but she instantly coped with the memories and continued, "But his business appealed to a businesswoman, and she decided to remove the competitor and take his business for herself." "What do you mean?" "What do you mean?" said the pale woman. "I mean that in order to gather evidence of your involvement in the murder of my loved one, I went to work for the police and agreed to an undercover operation. Let's meet Lieutenant Lisey." The door to the hall swung open and a squad of 6 men in dark uniforms and balaclavas burst briskly into the room. There was a murmur in the crowd of invitees, and some woman shrieked hysterically. Lisey walked confidently up to the commandos, took some paper from their hands and, as if it were a precious gift, solemnly presented it to the unfortunate mother-in-law. From the outside, it all looked like a wedding prank with an approved script. The guests still could not believe in the reality of what was happening. But the woman was not laughing at all. A mask of fear and hatred shrouded her face. Her husband's eyes widened in horror as he looked like he was about to have a stroke. "Pam, this is an arrest warrant for you and your husband. You're charged with multiple counts of murder, raiding, and blackmail." The groom's mother even dropped the microphone from her hands and staggered toward the exit, but the law enforcers instantly oriented themselves and cut off her escape route. Ron was dumbfounded at first and thought he was going crazy. Then he rushed to save his parents, but he was quickly waved away and rushed to his fiancée for clarification. "Lisey, what's going on?" The girl had been waiting for this conversation for a long time. She suppressed the excitement that arose from his disconcerted look and coldly replied with prepared phrases. "Ron, I'm sorry. I'm not who I pretended to be. I've been working in law enforcement for 6 years. I'm sorry, but your parents are really involved in criminal activity." The young man couldn't believe what had happened. Just a few minutes ago, in anticipation of the long-awaited moment of marriage with his favorite girl, he dreamed of a future happy family life. And now he found himself in the midst of some chaos and phantasmagoria. The guy was seized by the fear of losing his mind completely. He looked into the familiar and native features of the former bride's face and realized that he did not know this person at all. Was there something in this girl, for which he loved her with all his heart, or before him a complete stranger? A stranger. Lisey caught the testing gaze of her former fiancé and hurried away. It was hard for her to be around him. The guy's sad eyes seemed to see right through her. Though she had thought herself impenetrable for some time now, she could not keep the wave of some strange anxiety at bay. The thoughts in her head were confused. The main goal of the last few years had been achieved, but somehow it didn't make her feel any better. 6 long years, step by step, Lisey went to this moment, the triumph of retribution. It's true what they say. Revenge is a dish best served cold. And it was all for Carl, or rather in memory of him. Then a very young girl, just leaving the walls of the orphanage and inspired by the long-awaited freedom, met Carl right on the street. Coming out of an underground pedestrian passage, Lisey tripped, and the strap of her old sandals treacherously broke. The frustrated girl, almost crying from frustration, tried to reattach it in vain to somehow get home. A handsome young man sitting in a nearby parked car noticed the girl's agony and rushed to her aid. "Girl, let me try to fix it," he offered. When Lisey raised her eyes full of despair and met his benevolent gaze, everything around suddenly ceased to exist. Sandals, cars, street, passers-by. Everything remained somewhere far away, in a parallel universe. I guess that's love at first sight. Carl, that was the guy's name, also failed to cope with the time-worn shoes and announced her untimely demise in a sad voice. Lisey was amused by this attitude toward minor annoyances, and the young man, looking at her with a serious look, suddenly said, "I recognize you. You're Cinderella. I'll tell you a secret. I'm the prince. Now I just have to help you." The girl laughed. Her heart felt unusually light. "Let's go here." The prince nodded at the sign of the shoe store. No, thank you." Lisey hastily refused. She knew for sure that she couldn't even afford slippers in this store. "You forgot that I am your savior," said with a smile, and elegantly offered her his hand. Carl turned out to be a real gentleman. He paid for the bought sandals and drove the girl home. Lisey frantically turned out the last money from the piggy bank to pay back the debt, but the young man only kissed her hand and said goodbye, without even leaving his phone number. The girl was left only to sigh, remembering this amazing case. But the fairy tale had just begun. The next day, Carl brought her a huge bouquet of roses of an incredible lilac hue and invited her for a walk. The relationship developed slowly, beautifully. From each phone call and meeting, the girl's heart sank with happiness. The world again played with all possible colors. It seemed that a fair balance was established and only good things were waiting for Lisey. The guy introduced her to his parents, and a few months later made her an official proposal. The wedding was scheduled for June. The bride is fully immersed in the pleasant troubles, sewing a wedding dress, making a menu in the restaurant, wanted to think over and take into account every detail of the grandiose holiday. But for the groom, summer never came. That damned call from Carl's old friend, police investigator John, with the tragic news, took Lisey out of the fairy tale world and sent back to the tragic past. The girl remembered rushing to the crime scene and sobbing hysterically, trying to break through the cordon until she was led away and sedated by paramedics. Lisey still didn't understand how she had survived the funeral of her beloved. It seemed her soul had died with him. But after several months of complete prostration, there was a keen desire to find out the reasons for the death of her fiancé. Everything pointed to a contract killing. In a private conversation, John said that Carl had long complained of threats and pressure from a certain family, but there was no evidence of their involvement. That's when Lisey swore that she would find and punish the killer, no matter how long it took her to do it. And the road turned out to be long and thorny. Police school, hard work in the operational and investigative department, and then this, as it turned out later, the most difficult task. After all, at first she did not know that Ron was not involved in the criminal schemes of his parents. When she realized that, she wanted to give up on the investigation. To deceive a good guy was not a good idea for an honest girl. But John was adamant there was no other way. If she really wanted to expose the killers, she had to fulfill the task. There was information that perhaps in the house of the suspect stored documented evidence, and the task of Lisey was to infiltrate, find, and photograph them. Everything went according to plan. Almost. The search in Pam's office was in full swing. Gloved experts were methodically removing all documents and items, filming and describing them. John nodded to Lisey, who entered, adjusting her police badge on her uniform. "All the paperwork is in place," he said, rubbing his hands together in satisfaction. "There's enough here for several terms." He suddenly snatched a sheet of paper from the table and handed it to the girl. "Lisey, look, maybe you'll be interested." It was an adoption document. It turned out that Ron's parents had taken him from an orphanage at an early age, so that's why he was so different from them. She remembered his kind, sparkling gaze that used to envelop her so cozily and warmly. Something suddenly pinched in the girl's chest, and there was a strong desire to see her former fiancé again. The young man sat in the spacious living room on the sofa and stared blankly at one point, waiting for strangers to finish their rough work and leave him alone. Lisey sat down quietly beside him. She felt bad. The guilt of ruining the guy's life tormented her. "Do you hate me?" she asked quietly. He woke up from his forgetfulness and hastened to answer. "Don't make it up. I understand you very well. I just can't understand how my relatives could do such a thing." Lisey handed Ron a document from the study. "They're not exactly your relatives." He read it and just sighed deeply. It was hard to surprise him now. "It doesn't get easier by the hour, but a lot of things are becoming clear," he said sadly into the void. Such a calm reaction confused the girl even more. Her chest tightened and the words of justification came out of her mouth. "Ron, when I agreed to the assignment, I had no idea that the son of criminals could turn out to be a great guy. Every day it was harder and harder for me to lie to you. After all, I liked you more and more." The guy turned his head and looked at the girl's face, trying to understand whether what she was saying was the truth or just another lie for a greater purpose. There was remorse in her gaze. The big brown eyes were more sincere than ever, and the tears that sprang up struck Ron dead. He'd never seen Lisey so open. Ever since the beginning of their relationship, he'd sensed some sort of reticence. He realized that in the heart of his beloved remained one hidden little door to the depths of the soul, so far inaccessible to him. He wrote off the closeness to the childhood trauma of losing his parents at an early age. He had hoped to earn absolute trust with his love and to pick up the cherished key. But now it was different. Her soul suddenly opened up and showed her vulnerability and nobility. This was the real her, maybe even better than the one he had originally fallen in love with. On impulse, Ron grabbed Lisey's hand and pressed it to his trembling chest. "If that's true, then let's start over. I can't imagine my life without you." The girl suddenly shuddered. The door slammed shut again. "I'm sorry. I need some time to sort out my feelings," she whispered, releasing his hand gently and looking into his eyes once more to say goodbye. Ron spent the weekend on the couch, just staring at the ceiling in complete prostration. He didn't feel like eating or drinking. Lisey answered his calls with mumbled responses and hung up, promising to call him back. At the beginning of the week, Ron made an effort to pull himself together and drove to work. His co-workers whispered behind him and gave him wary glances. 6 resignations were already on his desk. His deputy, a short, balding Sean, showed up in his office with a concerned look on his face. "Ron! We're in big trouble. Clients and partners are breaking contracts one after another. We've had 14 rejections, and it's only been 3 days. Word is spreading fast around town, and our reputation is at an all-time low." Ron had foreseen this development, but the scale of the avalanche was worrying. Law wasn't his favorite profession, but it was too much time and effort, and he didn't want to be left without a livelihood because his parents' business had been arrested. His brain was feverishly trying to find a way out of the situation. Was there no way to influence their decision? No. Well, Ron. Of course, I personally called and offered discounts and special conditions. In response, the same phrase, and I quote, "We don't want to deal with criminals. Goodbye." These words made the young man shiver. Of course. Now he was also enrolled in the bandits. Only a miracle could save the case. But he wasn't going to give up so soon. Sean, today during the day, actively work on all key customers. He began to make orders, loyalty program and so on. And the advertising department, a special approach to new clients. "The advertising department has completely quit," the deputy hastened to insert. The chief exhaled deeply with annoyance but immediately gathered himself internally. In front of the subordinates cannot give weakness. "I'll take care of it myself," he said in a calm voice. Sean sincerely sympathized with his boss. He had been working in this field for a long time and had changed several jobs, but Ron was the most generous and humane of all the managers. Many times he had helped Sean out, and he was very grateful for it. Now he was willing to turn himself inside out to make things right. But nothing was working. For a week, Ron and his trusty deputy had been fighting night and day, trying to put together a crumbling law firm with a tarnished reputation. The prospect of bankruptcy loomed ahead. Ron felt like a squeezed lemon. Another busy day at work had left him with no certainty about the future. He sat behind the wheel of his car in despair. His heart was bleeding as he watched his life's work of the past few years sink to the bottom. Resentment against the whole world froze a heavy stone in his chest and forced him to press the gas pedal to the floor. Bitter thoughts clouded the consciousness. His parents turned out to be criminals. His beloved left him on the wedding day, and now she doesn't even want to see him. His business is falling apart. Everyone is turned away and no one believes him now. From now on, he is an outcast in this hostile world. His body was tired of everything and wanted to end all problems at once. His hands did not want to control not only the machine, but also his own life. The mind switched off, fixing lastly a strong blow and how everything spun, and the sky and the earth changed places. Nobody took the phone for a long time, and then the ringing suddenly was interrupted by someone else's hoarse voice. "Ron?" Lisey was confused by the surprise. The unknown voice coughed and said dryly into the receiver, "Hello. The young man is in intensive care, 4th City." Lisey turned pale. The light suddenly faded in her eyes and she had to grab the edge of the table to keep from falling. "What's wrong with him?" she whispered in a weak voice. "Come and find out," she mumbled indifferently into the receiver, and the phone rang with a jerky dial tone. "Lisey, what's wrong?" A worried John jumped up. She regained her balance. There was no time to explain. All the way there, her heart was trying to jump out of her chest with worry. "What's wrong?" "Jesus, Ron, you just hang on." With the trouble came an epiphany. The girl finally realized that she loved him truly, sincerely. How had she never realized it before? Maybe because this love came not in a flash as with Carl, but carefully and imperceptibly, step by step, and covered her with a warm and cozy shawl. She probably didn't see her because Ron was always there, ready to rush to her at a moment's notice. She just didn't appreciate him. No, she couldn't lose another family member. The doctor had flatly refused to talk to her at first. Even assurances that she was the patient's fiancée hadn't impressed him. The doctor demanded the next of kin. I had to use my police ID. "Yours have already come," questioned. The doctor nonchalantly parried. In despair, the girl was ready to burst into tears. "Please," she whispered. Her pleading look softened the man at last, but the phrases from him sounded harsh. "The young man was in a car accident. He has a concussion, chest contusion and spinal injury. He's in a coma right now. It's unknown when he'll come out of it." Every word was cold metal against the wall of the hospital corridor. She thought she was about to lose her mind imagining how all this had happened. She had to pull herself together immediately. True and false, the girl made her way into the ward. In the middle of the spacious room was a functional bed, in the headboard glowing with multicolored sensors and a small screen modern ventilator. Her eyes filled with tears at the sight of the still body of her favorite man lying on the blue sheet. Several sterile bandages covered the wounds on his arms, chest, and face. The swelling on his face was crimson. "Ron," she called out in a whisper and touched his soft hair lightly. There was silence in response. Only the working machine gave out a sharp, nasty squeak. Lisey didn't know what she was hoping for. The feeling of pity was replaced by self-torture. She had something to do with what had happened. First she used it and then she threw it away like a piece of junk. That's what it looked like from the outside. Poor Ron. How he must have felt. Only now did she realize how she felt. Even if he couldn't hear her, she still had to say it. "I'm sorry, Ron," she said aloud, and squeezed his cold palm with her trembling fingers. "I shouldn't have done that to you. I've cursed myself 100 times for it. Only now I realize that I can't be without you. I love you so much." The speech was so fervent that its trembling was transmitted to the machine, which immediately began to beep differently. The patient's hand trembled, and she watched Ron's eyes open slightly and rushed down the hallway to find the medics. On the way home, Lisey stopped to pick up groceries and medicine. It had been a week since she'd moved Ron into his house, and she'd taken up residence in the guest bedroom next door so that she could always be there for him. The boy had changed a lot since the accident. At first he'd been excited every time Lisey came over, but as he realized the helplessness of his own body, his mood worsened. Doctors did not make any predictions, saying only that everything depends on the patient. It takes a long time to recover. Only the most persistent could do it, but Ron took these words as a judgment. He reacted aggressively to the modern wheelchair that Lisey had gotten through her friends. "I will not ride on this ram," he said, as cut off. The guy stopped fighting at all. Now when he saw his ex-fiancée, he turned his eyes to the wall and said, "Lisey, please go away. There's nothing you can do for me. Live your life. You don't owe me anything." The girl hoped that the native walls at least somehow help him to find his balance and begin to fight for life. But everything only got worse. Depression finally took over his mind, and he humbly submitted to it. Nothing made him happy anymore. Neither Lisey with a devoted look, ready to do anything for him, nor good news from work. The faithful deputy still managed to keep the firm afloat. Attempts to do therapeutic gymnastics did not give the expected quick effect, and he abandoned them altogether. His body was weakening, and his legs remained immobile. Ron just lay there, waiting to die. Lisey's heart ached at the sight of his mental torment. Thoughts of her lover haunted her at home and at work. In the corridor of the police department, Lisey met Wendy, staff psychologist and part-time best friend. "Wendy, can I come to you for tea?" she asked embarrassedly. Between friends, this phrase was a code and meant that one of them urgently needed help. Wendy immediately took the girl under her arm and led her into her office. "Come on. I just had a wonderful tea presented to me, so let's try it out." The leaves, which were bunched and unappetizing when dry, opened into huge, shiny burdocks in the hot water. The delicious and flavorful drink was conducive to conversation. After listening to the problem, Wendy immediately said in a connoisseur's tone, "Motivation is needed." Lisey sighed in response. "I've tried everything. Nothing helps." My friend thought for a moment and then came up with a new idea. "Well, give him, for example, a dog. Let her walks with her and at the same time and moves himself," and added, "only not too sharp, so that they did not torment each other." "And indeed let it be a real friend," thought the happy girl. After his parents' arrest and disability, Ron has hardly any friends left. At first she looked through the kennel ads for a long time, but then suddenly she remembered about a dog shelter. Once she drove there acquaintances, who claimed that only there you can find the most faithful dog. A chubby girl in glasses let Lisey into the territory, and immediately businesslike asked, "Are you looking for a specific breed?" The pets imprisoned behind bars made an oppressive impression on the girl. Some of them stuck their curious faces out of their cages and barked excitedly at her. Some of them just lay at the end of the enclosure and did not react, probably lost hope forever. Lisey's heart suddenly ached. She cursed herself for coming here. How do you pick someone and leave someone behind? "Just abstract yourself," the shelter employee advised. She had seen that look on the visitors' faces many times before. "And there we have the babies." She waved to the right. There were 2 tiers of cages with puppies, and entering the room, Lisey saw right in front of her first sad, wet eyes, which reflected a huge, faithful dog soul, and then a narrow little face and a puny white body with red spots on crooked, weak legs. "Take me away," the touching look begged. Lisey couldn't move on. Her heart remained at the cage of this baby. "Oh, this one's sick. I'm warning you right away." The girl with glasses shouted to her. 2 days ago at the garbage dump. Washed and treated, of course. But he has rickets from malnutrition, so it's a lot of work. Here, look how many healthy ones." She pointed at the others. But Lisey didn't hear her. She had already made her choice. The happy baby snuggled behind the girl's sinus and was quiet. She refused to take the carrier because when she got it in her hands, the puppy shook from the cold. Perhaps he was just shaking from fear that he would be examined and immediately returned to the prison cell of the shelter. His trembling, frail body clung trustingly to the girl, and his eyes pleaded tearfully. She squeezed the baby and whispered to him. Ron was lying in bed as usual, staring at the painting on the wall. It depicted a narrow, cobbled street in the old part of some seaside town, and it had given him a pleasant feeling before. He imagined that he was walking along it, only to go a few more steps down the vine-covered alley, and around the corner he would be met by the majestic power of the bright blue boundless sea. The picture now seemed a mockery. There was nowhere he could go or go now. He'd have to ask someone to take it down. Better just white, featureless walls. To be fair, Lisey arrived and with a mysterious look holding something behind her back said, "I have a present for you." Ron watched her indifferently as she pulled something out of her knit cardigan. What presents? He wouldn't need anything in his life. But what she suddenly presented to him in her hands right to his face, a lively eyeball of emotion, struck him to the core. As a child, his mother had not allowed him to have dogs, though he had asked her endlessly. She'd screamed that they only made the house dirty and smelly. Ron was upset at first, but then he got over it and just watched the dog people on the street with envy. So the surprise was a success. He looked into the kind puppy eyes and saw his reflection. He whimpered happily, dodged, poked his wet nose and licked his new owner right in the face. Ron almost gasped at the sudden rush of affection. A wave of affection washed over him. He pulled the baby to him and pressed it against his chest and neck, covering his eyes with happiness. Lisey laughed and cried at the same time from such a touching scene of acquaintance. Suddenly she realized, he's really sick. He suffered on the street. I went to the vet on the way and then bought some medicine at the pharmacy. The baby, as if to prove her words, struggled to waddle across the bed on crooked, knotty legs. My God, just like me, Ron thought, feeling sorry for the baby. He suddenly felt an incredible rush of energy. He was ready to jump up and start treating his friend. But the miracle didn't happen. The lower part of his body did not want to respond to the calls of reason. Realizing the situation, the boy leaned back on the pillow in despair. Is this a mockery? He asked the girl with pain in his voice. Not at all. I just liked him. The doctor said it will take some effort, but it can be cured. She looked seriously into his sad eyes and asked, almost in a whisper, or should I take him back? Ron perked up. No. He wouldn't let her send her new friend to eternal torment and destruction. As if sensing his thoughts, the baby shrieked and licked his hand. Wendy was right. And who could resist the little one, who overcame his own pain and, pulling up his legs behind him, was rushing toward his master with a happy face. Now Ron felt responsible for the fate of the sick animal, who had suffered in hunger and cold, but had not lost faith in people. He spent hours practicing various exercises, and from now on he gratefully accepted Lisey's help. Little Finnick, the dog was named for his shiny brown eyes, never left his man's side. The boy's muscles grew stronger every day, and soon he was able to get into the stroller on his own. It no longer seemed a dungeon to him. Now he clearly knew that it was just a daily helper in his numerous activities, for which he suddenly found the strength and desire. Slowly, the nerve conduction in his lower limbs returned. The fattened and healed puppy, too, was slowly getting on his hind legs. His coat was glossy and shiny, and his eyes, in love with people and the world, sparkled with joy. Previously, Lisey's mornings had begun with poor Ron's usual refusal to eat and a bitter cup of coffee alone in the kitchen. Now the restless Finnick, with the first rays of the sun, considered it his duty to wake up and get all the household up, so that they too would rejoice at the happy day beginning. And what other day can there be if there is a house, food, and you are loved by everyone? He limped from room to room, barking happily, until the owners finally gathered in the kitchen for breakfast. Slowly, Ron began to take his stroller out to the park nearby, followed by the growing puppy, happy to see the boundaries of their world expanding. The boy had a sudden urge to pull the dusty camera out of the nightstand again. In the evenings, he and Lisey would review everything they'd captured during the day. There were funny dog faces in different angles, and the mysterious morning park, shrouded in a light haze of fog, and just a bright ladybug drinking from a drop of dew on a green leaf. All the beauties and wonders of nature were once again available to the boy's imagination, in which the thirst for creativity awoke with renewed vigor. Lisey suggested Ron to start his own page on the internet to publish his photo works. Not only his favorite girl, but also the opinions of the regulars of the World Wide Web made the young man believe in his own talent and turn a hobby into a profession. Now he was even more eager to get up from his wheelchair to quietly sneak up and capture in a separate frame the magic of the world around him. His legs, too, succumbed to the general intention. Gradually, centimeter by centimeter, they covered a considerable distance. Ron was thankfully able to roll his wheelchair into the garage and walk on his stick. It was almost a year later. During this time, Finnick had become a handsome adult dog. Only a slight curvature of his front legs reminded of his former illness. He accompanied his favorite owners everywhere, proudly carrying a medallion on his chest, a symbol of noble origin, or just a sign that the dog is loved. The roots were now quite impressive. In the morning, Lisey would always go jogging in the park, and Ron would just walk around with his camera, looking for inspiration. Then the girl would leave for work, and he would work on the computer. 2 months ago, Ron's parents were sentenced, and the guy started periodically picking up packages for them and taking them to jail. Lisey watched the regular collections in silence. In response to her reproachful glance, Ron only sighed heavily and said, "Come on, I can't do it any other way. They're still my parents, and I don't have and won't have anyone else." The girl shrugged, but each time she obediently drove the boy to the detention center for a date. What can you do, since her lover has such a good heart? Today was a special day. For almost 3 months, Ron had been preparing his own photo exhibition at the gallery. He was very worried because some of the works had not even been seen by Lisey. He didn't know what kind of impression they would make on the public. And would anyone even come? After all, one thing fans on the internet, And the other, communication in person, eye to eye. And what if he imagined that someone else shares his vision of the world? Lisey, of course, supports and admires him in every possible way, but can the opinion of a loving girl be called objective? As the day of the exhibition's opening drew nearer, Ron's doubts grew more and more acute. Tonight even he was up most of the night. As he left for work, Lisey kissed him tenderly, promised not to be late, and told him not to worry too much. They had done everything they could, formalized the works, hung them up, notified the public. Now they should just relax and see what happened. Ron tried to take her advice, but it wasn't working. At the appointed time, a cab came to pick him up and take him to the gallery. The driver looked back at the boy all the way, and then finally he couldn't stand it and asked, "Say, are you on posters all over the city? A famous photographer?" Ron was embarrassed, not knowing whether he would be scolded for the intrusive advertising or praised. "I don't know about famous, but yes, that's me." To his surprise, the cab driver was even happy. "Happy. My daughter got into photography thanks to you. She used to sit in her room with her phone only, but after she found you, now she can't go home. She says she wants to be just as cool. Yesterday, she spent an hour and a half hunting for a spider with a camera in the park near her house to get a beautiful shot. By the way, I was going to your exhibition." The excitement went away like a hand. My face blurred into a smile, and my soul became calm and good. If at least one young mind he saved from the stupid contemplation of obsessive artificial created content and taught to appreciate the real and living, you can consider his mission a success. But he did not expect such success. People gathered in great numbers. Even the television came to cover the significant cultural event. Familiar and unfamiliar guests came up, congratulated and shook hands with the master. Lisey, in a long, bright red dress, was unusually good. Pride for her beloved overwhelmed her. After all, he had found himself in this life. In every person there is a certain potential and abilities, which are dormant until time. Only those who are not afraid to reveal them to the world and be recognized will be truly happy. Ron approached the girl from behind and wrapped her in a gentle embrace. It was the best day of his life. Only one thing could make it better. "Lisey, marry me. Again." He whispered in her ear, tickling her with his breath. The girl turned to him and threw herself joyfully around his neck, not hiding her tears of happiness. "Ron, thank you for believing me. I've waited so long for this. I love you."